This episode of Discography Discussion was recorded on January 17th, 2026. Author and Punisher. And if you had your doubts, but the drone machines continued on, then you are ready for this episode of Discography Discussion. I am Joe. That is Lucas. The time has come to talk about some serious doom and gloom dirge made by one man and a very strange-looking pile of machinery, my friend. How are you doing today?
Joe, I couldn't be happier to be here tonight. And you know, nothing makes me happier than the idea that you might need a musical instrument that comes with OSHA regulations. Nothing is funnier to me than the thought that if I don't play this correctly, I'm gonna lose fingers.
So what you're trying to avoid is a Tony Iommi situation where the accident ultimately makes you a better, more influential musician.
You know, I never thought I would ever use the sentence, a post-Tony Iommi future. But here we are in the era where metal means CNC ground steel and industrial actually means industrial. It's not just a cute turn of phrase or a reference to an ideology. No. This thing is so heavy. It's music so heavy, you lift with your legs and not with your back. You know what I mean? It's what would happen if dubstep gave up ecstasy and took on steroids.
Whoa. 2 minutes into this one, and we're already talking about dubstep. Please, sir, get out of my house.
I am Joe, I know you have built this edifice, but I'm ready to burn it down.
Okay, let's get it. Let's make it happen, sir. You know, I think it's interesting, too, that you brought up Tony Iommi. Maybe that was me.
I didn't bring up Tony Iommi.
But,
you brought up Tony Iommi.
You know, if this was a horror movie, the box of fingers would not be a good thing.
No.
And for some reason, when we talk about anything related to metal and we talk about where did this come from, we go all the way back to Black Sabbath, and we just have to mention it because, yeah, that's a real thing. Dude makes his own prosthetic and creates some of the best defining music of all time that has led us from what was the blues to Author and Punisher and beyond.
You know, it's interesting you bring up this idea of creating one's own prosthetic, right? Because think about it. I mean, Tony Iommi, through we'll say a series of misadventures, loses a finger or two, and then says, fuck it, I still want to play guitar. All he invented was a new form of slide. You know what a guitar slide is. You're a guitar player. I'm not. You know what a guitar slide is. If you're playing blues or certain other genres, you need a metal or glass cylinder to place around your finger to get a particular tone. Tony Iommi said, fuck it, that will be my finger. I don't see such a hard line between this and what industrial would become, because so much of the early industrial movement, for lack of a better term, was non-musicians making music on homemade instruments. I will spare the audience my lecture on what industrial is or isn't. It's well past December. I can no longer criticize you for industrial December that was never industrial in the first place. However...
Don't make me get Matt Nas in here.
You know what? Do I sound like a man who is worried what he thinks? I'm kidding. Matt Nas, I'm sure you're an incredibly nice guy. I'm not going to pick that fight.
Yeah, baby.
However, Author and Punisher. When people talk about industrial, I think they hear one of like three things, right? If you're an old school weirdo like me, you're thinking Throbbing Gristle, Clock DVA, Spawn Ranch, Skinny Puppy, and Ministry. You're thinking a very particular era where industrial was more a mentality. It was more about aggressively attacking the dominant culture through these very weird and sometimes extremely unpleasant channels. There are people who hear industrial and they think KMFDM, they think Fear Factory, they think Static X, all bands that I like, by the way. For as much as I'm clearly going to joke about these bands today, I do like them. It is joking out of love.
I'm raising my hand by default because, yes, that's exactly what I think.
Yeah, you think...
You're going to get to Nine Inch Nails, right?
Eventually, yeah, and you can't not get there. But industrial kind of becomes more of a nomenclatural thing than a mentality. And then there's Author and Punisher, which is literally CNC'd steel, maniacal madman roaring into a homemade microphone, doing this thing on a scale that we all love so much. They say that the only thing worse then the band Tool is a Tool fan. The only thing worse than industrial is someone literally playing an industrial instrument. Not everyone can play the angle grinder, is what I'm saying.
It is funny that you jumped immediately from Black Sabbath to the man who creates his own machine to create said industrial, because I was thinking about this band. You've been bringing this one up for a while.
Yeah.
Also, shout out to Lance Algood, the king of metal. He steered the ship in the direction of Author and Punisher for so long. Today is the day, my friend. I started asking myself, why is Author and Punisher interesting compared to other doom metal, industrial metal type acts? And I thought about the journey. I thought about what started with Black Sabbath, became Judas Priest, went through the 80s and the big hair thing, went through the 90s and became the new thing, and fast forward into the 2000s and the 2010s, where we kind of became a manufactured formula again. I know most music that you hear is in some way a manufactured formula, but what makes this stand out to me is the intent of the performer and the intent of the artist. 2025 was a challenging year for creative people, because now we're talking about that thing, and I really don't want to say that thing, but I have to say it once so we're all on the same page. We're all having conversations about AI right now, and I didn't think about Author and Punisher like an evolution of metal. What I thought about was an evolution of performance, and that's where I think we really want to start this conversation. This is not somebody who's sitting down programming the music, which is what sequencing has done before. This is somebody who said, I like the way that sounds, but I want to actually be able to play it by myself. What do I have to build or put together to make that happen? And when he didn't find the instrument or the interface that he wanted, he went out and made it. And it's not just he manufactured it out of computer parts. There's some serious fabrication going on here that adds to the overall appearance of Author and Punisher. It looks like this music sounds. It is slow. It is a train that is just slowly spinning up. We're not gonna go any faster than this, and you can't stop us once we get started. Before we get started, though, I want to take this time to say thank you to everyone for listening to this podcast. Thank you for liking and for subscribing. If you're not a subscriber, you can find everything Discography Discussion at discussmetal.com. We are on every podcast service that exists, whether your favorite is Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or something else that is probably pulling the information from Apple Podcasts. We thank you for listening. And if you want to continue this conversation with us, Discord is where it's at, discord.discussmetal.com. So, Lucas, would you tell me about Author and Punisher?
Absolutely. Author and Punisher is a one-man doom industrial metal power noise dark ambient thing as produced by one man, Tristan Schoen. Tristan was a veteran of metal and industrial metal and all of that. He did all of that, and one day woke up and said, bandmates, what's that? And decided he wanted to do his own thing. Now, Tristan Schoen addressed a problem that I, as someone who attended a lot of industrial shows in the early to late 2010s from the 2000s on, realized someone playing with a guitar on stage with a laptop is not precisely the most visually interesting thing, and it prevents this idea of improvisation that a lot of early industrial actually played with. So Tristan Schoen decided, fuck it, I used to be an electrical engineer, let's make my own instruments. Now, this has been an evolutionary process. Author and Punisher has been around a lot longer than most people realize. I know many people who have come into the, Author and Punisher Extended Universe have come in within the last couple of albums of his, but his career goes way back, actually. And he has done something consistently that, thinking about this as a critic, he has done something that's been very interesting. He has evolved and grown and changed, but is always after a singular thing, a singular tone, a singular idea. And that singular idea is a slow-moving, heavy vehicle running you over and crushing you to death. This is the musical equivalent of that one scene in All Quiet on the Western Front, the third one, the most recent one, where someone, spoilers, gets run over by a fucking early tank. That's the experience of listening to Author and Punisher. Joe, you and I talk a lot about media, and one of the things we end up talking about is the first time you hear or see a thing. The first time I ever heard Author and Punisher was from a friend of mine who is an anthropologist and archaeologist. Hey, Corey, I know you're not listening to this, but hey, brother, I hope you hear this someday. He's a good dude, and he's one of my favorites. He was like, hey, man, you like industrial. Let me play you this maniac. And he played a song called Terror Bird. And I sat there going, what the fuck is this? Exactly. And more importantly, not what the fuck is this? How the fuck is this? And then he plays me a song called Nihil Strength. And I see this bald, shrieking maniac behind what I can best describe as a deli meat slicer on steroids making music. And I thought, I can't decide if I love this or if this scares me too much. And as a horror movie critic, a thing scaring me too much is perhaps a line too far, which means naturally I spent the next 6 weeks listening to, well, you're about to hear it.
Speaking of horror movies, why don't you take a second to tell everybody about the Fright Lab and all the spooky films that we've been talking about over at thefrightlab.com.
Happily. Some of you have heard my voice before, but there's some of you who haven't. And those of you who haven't, thank you for listening to this episode of Discography Discussion. Those of you who are hearing my voice for the first time, hi, I'm Lucas Yoakum. I am the writer, researcher, primary strategist. I don't know. I'm looking for a Battlefield reference that I don't think matters. Anyway, I'm the main voice behind a show called The Fright Lab, which is produced by this guy you may have heard of called Joe Wren. I don't know if you know this guy, but he is the primary producer, engineer, co-host, my second voice, the yang to my yin. The Fright Lab addresses horror media and horror movies from a perspective of asking, well, where does that connect to real life? And by real life, I mean history, psychology, literary theory. I want to connect the horror media to the horror world, and that includes sometimes podcasts. So if you like my voice, which I guess I'm sorry. I'm kidding. I think more of myself than that. But if you like what I'm doing, or you're interested in hearing what else Joe can do when we're not just talking about crazy sounding music, go to thefrightlab.com or find your favorite podcast catching app, whatever that is, Apple, Spotify, whatever, and look up The Fright Lab. We're basically on all of them these days. We talk about horror movies. We talk about horror media. What scares you? We want to know. We have 50 some odd full-length episodes and another 31 short episodes. You have no excuse. Go listen to some spooky media and listen to us at thefrightlab.com. But Joe, we're not here to talk about scary movies tonight. We're talking about scary music.
That's right.
Horror movies as music. Let's talk about Author and Punisher.
I remember the first time I heard Author and Punisher. It was the King of Metal. And Jeff,
hey y'all,
started talking about this guy who builds his own apparatus and creates this just droning dirge of insane, heavy bass frequencies that make your head want to explode. And I was interested because I saw the pictures. And we're not quite there yet. But the record, Ursus Americanus, that picture, that's the guy that I saw. And I was fascinated. Mostly because I was trying to come up with the mechanics of what I was seeing him do. You heard Lucas say it. He builds his own instrument. So this is somebody who said, how many things can I do with one hand? How many buttons can I program? How many switches? Last I saw, he had 3 or 4 iterations of this. It's down to like a flight stick with a bunch of triggers on it. And he makes it make sense to him. And why is that different than other industrial metal? If you're talking about something like Circle of Dust or Nine Inch Nails, etc., usually what you're talking about is heavy metal, guitars, bass, vocals with sequenced drums. That is not by any means all of industrial, but generally speaking, that's what you're talking about if you go back 30 or 40 years. Author and Punisher, like you said, is trying to create a train wreck of onslaught that you, the listener, have to sit and endure that's not programmed. Because we've all seen technology throughout the years change the way music is made and the way it's presented. And there's absolutely a group out there that 20 or 30 years ago just programmed what they wanted you to hear, and that's what you got. This guy said, no, I want to make this music. The intent is very brutal, but this isn't a grindcore thing where we're just trying to be fast for the sake of fast, or we're trying to be gravelly for the sake of being gravelly. This is, I want to make you feel this for the next 30 to 45 minutes. And it's going to be me and my sequencers, my machines. Good luck if you make it through to the other side.
You know, you bring up this idea of industrial going back 30 or 40 years, and here's the place where I have to be a bit of a pedant, right?
Do it. That is what the people are here for, sir.
Thank God I've found a place. So when you get down to what industrial is, what industrial, I guess, means, for lack of a better term, you are talking about a musical movement, a musical tradition almost at this point, that stretches all the way back to kind of punk. So flashback, let's move all the way back to the late 1970s, the early 80s in Britain. It is, shall we say, a hard place to live, a hard place to work. And you get a bunch of art school dropouts going, you know, none of us are in the the strictest sense of the word, musicians, much less very good ones. And so what they start doing is, fuck it, I'm not going to learn to play guitar, but I'm going to learn to modify a guitar in a way that I can play. So eagle-eared listeners are saying, Lucas, you're clearly talking about Throbbing Gristle. And yes, I am talking about Throbbing Gristle. And I'm also talking about guys like Monty Kazaza from Nurse with Wound. We are talking about bands that it was less about music and more about art, I think. I think it was more about trying to do a thing in the same way that a lot of guitarists picked up a guitar and said, well, I'm never going to be Rick Wakefield. I'm going to do my own thing, and that's how we get punk. It is an anger against prog. And yes, that's true of industrial, but also it is an anger against the world, which, 1970s, 1980s, hard place to live, basically everywhere. So industrial has stuck around because I think there is this idea of scary noise is good, confrontational noise is good, but it's become a thing in and of itself. I remember seeing a lot of acts, and for the record, I'm not insulting any of these acts. These are acts that I enjoyed seeing live, and some of them are my friends to this day. But if you didn't have an iMac or some sort of Apple laptop on stage with you, you weren't getting the tones you needed for your sampler, your keyboard, whatever.
That's a great visual for how technology improves, though, right?
Right. No, I mean, it's going to sound like I'm insulting that thing, and I'm not. It was just that no one had come up with a way to make it work. And Tristan Schoen, who would go on to create Author and Punisher, become Author and Punisher, was saying, okay, that's a cool idea and I like it, but I want to do it live and I want to be able to improv and I want to be able to make noise in a live way in the same way that like a jazz group might. Now, I know what you're thinking. Lucas, what the fuck are you talking about? This is as far from jazz as apples are from combat boots. And that's true, but hear me out. There is more of a thought that I can take this thing, I am making tones and I am modifying tones, and I am doing it with what amounts to an engineering teacher's nightmare, and I'm doing it live, and there's vocals. Well, sometimes. By vocals, I mean I am using my voice as an instrument, and that's something we will get to as this episode progresses. Author and Punisher, to me, is a very valid and very, I think, almost reasonable extension of what industrial is. In the same way that, like, Death Grips is industrial hip-hop, this notion of experimentation and taking noise and aggression and removing it from a metal and punk and hardcore paradigm and moving it into something else that kind of bypasses, like, post-punk and goth, it is its own animal, and it's very different. And trust me, ladies and gentlemen, Animal will come up near the end of this episode as we talk about the most recent Author and Punisher album. It requires an explanation that I only got last night.
You know, it's an interesting thought when you mentioned genre and kind of how things started. We each gave a different version of that, one being the origin of heavy metal and the other being the origin of industrial. Isn't it interesting how genre comes from typically one voice, one visionary, tweaking something else, and then convincing a lot of other people that it sounds good, it's interesting, it's different, thus inspiring the next generation of artists and musicians to go out and create that music. And now we have so many genres and subgenres. It's just fun how it evolves that way, like language, like anything else. Even the technology piece that you mentioned, yes, the MacBook was present because that was the latest technology. You go back to the 80s, we all like to complain about those digital drums, but that was
the 808, yeah,
ultimately cheaper than miking up a full drum set in somebody's brain. So though technology has changed how music is made throughout time, sometimes it's done because it's the only option. Sometimes it's not done very well, but you're told to listen to it anyway, and in some cases, if you listen to the radio, like it. Now we've got streaming services, and I mentioned this in the very beginning. We went from buying albums to buying songs to paying for a service that lets us listen to all the music at once to now, in theory, you're being told by that service to listen to music that was created 100% inside of a predictive text box. And that to me is frustrating when somebody like Author and Punisher is a step backwards and in the right direction for me, where let me take these ideas that come from sequencing and actually do it.
Well, I'm going to phrase it this way. Yeah, you can say that heavy metal emerges almost exclusively from Black Sabbath. And for a certain, for a certain audience, if you were trying to give like a fast 5-minute, what is heavy metal? Where did metal come from? Absolutely, man. Yeah, you've got to point to Black Sabbath. But you've got to point to like Phil Lynott and Thin Lizzy. And I'm not saying that as like I'm a huge Thin Lizzy fan. I'm not. But like that is a guy whose musical vision really impacted hard rock and metal eventually. But on top of that, like, okay, cool. Let's move it out a little bit. If you're going to say punk, who are you talking about? Are you talking about the Ramones? Are you talking about the New York Dolls? Are you talking about Black Flag? Are you talking about the Misfits? Are you talking about Sam Hain? Who are you talking about, right? Genre, it's worth considering, is not as hard of a line as we want to think it is. So permit me to fall into my own wheelhouse for just a second. And I want to reference something that William S. Burroughs said in the documentary Commissioner of Sewers. He makes this point about the line between disciplines and genre beginning to break down. He's talking about this idea of the cut-up. So the cut-up is a tradition that he kind of created by accident through a guy named Brian Geisen, who is a painter who is cutting up canvases to do paintings on top of a bunch of newspapers. And as he did so, cutting up those newspapers reveals all of these weird sections of newspaper that he kind of laid out next to each other, and it created funny or interesting sentences. That's the origin of the cut-up as a literary method, which is something that Burroughs kind of perfected. And he goes on to, Burroughs goes on to influence bands like Coil and Throbbing Gristle. He was close friends with Genesis P-Orridge, who is kind of the unfortunate godparent of industrial, who, for their flaws, is very important in the genre that we're hearing in the background of this episode right now. So, genre as a thing is helpful, and it's a good guide point. It's a good map. But the map is not the territory, right? And if we're going to talk about industrial, we have to think about it in the same way that, again, falling into my own wheelhouse, we have to think about horror. What is horror? Well, is horror Haxan, this 1920s silent horror film? Is it Halloween? Is it Terrifier? Is it The Exorcist? What is horror? Well, what is industrial? Industrial has changed. It is not what it was in 1984. Right now, we're hearing a song called Incinerator, and it is, in my mind, absolutely modern industrial. But so is LA Looks by Health, which is glossy and shiny and beats you up with the drum, but you could dance to it. You might not want to, but you could dance to it. I've been to a Health show. I know you can dance to it. However, it's as industrial as, say, Mr. Self-Destruct by Nine Inch Nails, or it's as industrial as Stigmata by Ministry, or it's as industrial as The Hacker by Clock DVA. What is industrial? I'm going to make the argument that the line between genres has broken down. Is Static X nu metal or is it industrial? My answer is yes. It's all of those things, but it becomes its own thing. It is none of those things in and of itself.
Most of the time, when I think industrial, I'm going to take the popular definition, which is, again, historically more sequenced. So when I think industrial, there's a component of, can I dance to this that
Sure.
I'm thinking about?
Sure.
And I know when you're talking about this type of doom industrial metal,
Yeah.
dirge is part of it, and nobody's trying to dance to the dirge. You're trying to feel it, right?
Sure, yeah.
Unless you really got a slow tap going on, in which case I'm not that talented, and your balance must be outstanding.
Speaking as someone who is the veteran of many goth nights, we're not talking about great dancing on the whole. But more importantly, as a rule, no one's cutting a rug to a funeral dirge. Remember that the phrase dirge is often presented first with the word funeral.
I'm going to need a picture of you in goth makeup or it didn't happen, sir.
You know what? There is this part of me that refuses to incriminate myself, but there is another part of me that is buddies with Dusty Gannon of formerly Vision Video, soon to be Dusty and the Agonal Gasps. Hi, Dusty. Hope you're listening, buddy. I will put it to you this way. Any photo you would see of me that might be all gothed up, let's say, is a minimum of 15 years old. And I refuse to leave any signposts to embarrass myself further. And by embarrass, I mean it really was a great time in my life, and I don't feel bad about it in the slightest. But I also don't post those things on Facebook for everyone to see. N'est pas?
Speaking of signposts, every race has a starting line, and every journey has a long, winding path that ultimately has a finish line. Doesn't matter if you're an individual who's in the middle of that journey, if you haven't started, or if you're looking back saying, man, that was a good time. Thankfully for us, Author and Punisher is still very much active, still creating new music. But let's talk about the beginning of Author and Punisher. What is, for me, the least interesting Author and Punisher record, but it's not unlistenable. It just sounds like the beginning of, okay, how do I make music by myself? 2005, The Painted Army.
Ah, yes, The Painted Army. So it's worth pointing out that my, point of reference, jump off point for Author and Punisher falls somewhere between Ursus Americanus and Beastland. So I was not really aware of The Painted Army until relatively recently. I don't want to say it's a bad album, but it is very clearly a person's early work. I would almost describe it in an artistic sense as like marginalia. It almost feels like it's so different from a person's entire, oeuvre, that it's a very different album altogether. It It's not a bad album, but it is very much a person's first outing. It does not have the sort of, predatory sophistication of women and children. And it lacks the, I'm going to hold you down and punch you until you tap out of Beastland. It is not a great album. I don't like the Painted Army. I'm sorry. Mr. Schoen, Tristan, can I call you Tristan? I really like your music a lot, but the Painted Army is a hard listen for me because I respect what you've done other than the Painted Army. You can hear his voice is kind of unprocessed, and it's not through the sort of, shall we say, experimental microphones he would go on to design and or create. It's hard to listen to, actually, in the same way that like fans of KMFDM are like, hey, I danced to this at goth clubs. Why are they playing distorted vacuum cleaners? Which, by the way, KMFDM's first live performance was allegedly 40 repurposed vacuum cleaners run through distortion pedals. It gives you an idea of where the band is versus where they used to be.
God, where was that on episode 200?
You want to know what? Episode 200, I was still a mostly normal journalist. That's the problem. Anyway, the Painted Army is, again, it's almost marginalia. It feels so different listening to this compared to his later material. But the thing that I'll say about the Painted Army that I actually kind of, admire maybe or like, is that you can kind of hear that, like, no, this is definitely Tristan Schoen. There is a level of, what's the word I'm looking for here? Venom in his voice. He's clearly pissed off and wants to beat you to death. And I admire that as a musical kind of design, as a musical thing that you're wanting to do. This album is industrial, but it's almost, for lack of a better term, cyberpunk, in as much that it's taking all of these old ideas about melody and vocal harmony and lyrics and putting it through this extremely electronic, ugly feature. Is it bad? I don't like it. I don't like the Painted Army. I've said that before. But if you're a completionist like me, it's valuable to hear where a musician comes from and what they end up doing.
This is the stereotype of industrial metal that I mentioned earlier.
Yes.
Very much sequenced. This is the first album for Author and Punisher. What do I hear? It's reminiscent of the earliest Clank records. Had more than one conversation with Clank Dialosa over the years where he's talked about being the go-to guy, and he was a big part of Circle of Dust. His original music is a faster version of this, to me. Again, oversimplification, but that's the vibe I'm getting. That stereotype of, I sequenced a drum part, I sequenced a little twinkle on top of it. It sounds like a sequenced idea that is just slowed down because we're, again, trying to dirge. We're the train of onslaught. We're not yet what Author and Punisher would be, but this was 2005, and if this is the first record you made, that doesn't mean that it wasn't in your head. This is just the first thing you got out, and it would not take long for the band to show up, as it were.
No, I agree with that. I think that's absolutely correct. One of the things about the Painted Army, like, if you're expecting Crueler, you're not going to get that. That's not what this album sounds like. I hate to say it, but it sounds like a lot of electronic rock that was happening kind of around the same time. I don't know if you've experienced this, Joe. You and I were talking earlier tonight before we started recording about a local band called The Fifth Element. That was, man, The Fifth Element was a lot of things. But the thing that I'll say about that band is that they were premature. They were like 5 different genres happening almost simultaneously that wouldn't come into maturity until about 2015, 2016, maybe. And one of the problems with that is that there is such a thing as just being ahead of your time. There's this whole kind of, subgenre, subgenre, whatever it is, of what I can only describe as electronic rock. Bands like Curve, that bands like, to a lesser extent, the Guano Apes. There's this very obscure band that I've never found anyone else who's ever heard called Vitro. That was this weird electronic rock thing, kind of in the vein of like God Lives Underwater, where they were doing electronic music with guitars and a live drummer, and you could dance to it, but it was not club music and it was not party music. It was its own weird animal. And as someone who loves God Lives Underwater, a sadly long forgotten band, hearing that there was someone else doing not something exactly the same, but doing something kind of in the same, I don't know, inspirational vein, maybe, around kind of the same decade is really cool. And knowing like, oh, Author and Punisher, this band I really like, would go on to do this cool thing 20 years on, it's kind of refreshing in a way. But I'll say it is very much a first album, you know? Speaking as someone who's done between short episodes and long episodes of his own podcast, I don't like listening to my early episodes. It's not because they're bad. I stand by them. I think I was correct about them and I stand by them. But it's weird to hear multiple years later what I was working on versus what I'm doing now. I would love to talk to Tristan Schoen and Mr. Schoen. Tristan, can I call you Tristan? If you're listening to this episode or you managed to hear it, we want to talk to you. Joe, where could they find you and where could they get a hold of us and say, hey, you guys aren't total assholes. I'd like to hear you.
I tell you what, Lucas, why don't you get on that wonderful world of Facebook, find Author and Punisher's page and say, hey, dude, you want to have a talk with us?
And Joe, how about you get on that wonderful world and go fuck yourself? I fucking hate Facebook, man.
Definitely album one. And when I hear this, when I see the album cover even, I don't think this is somebody who changed his intent. I think this was the album in his head, and whether he did this to get it out of the way so he could get on to the next thing, or the next thing just became something else, things are going to start changing very quick to what I think is an appropriate explanation of what is Author and Punisher. If somebody asked me, what is that? My answer is, are you familiar with a concept called a drone machine? Well, in 2010, Author and Punisher releases drone machines. Now we're starting to get more in what I was introduced to, which is that mechanical manual dirge.
Yeah. So a little bit of kind of helpful, I don't know, road signing, kind of map pointing. What is a drone machine? A drone machine is the component and side partner, the yang to the yin of a dub machine. Well, what's a dub machine? A dub machine and a drone machine are two pieces of nightmarish pieces of aluminum and steel that Tristan Schoen has created to make music. Now, they're attached to like MIDI processors, they're attached to other synth machines. There is something he has created, which is a fuck-off piece of metal attached to a fuck-off piece of electronics that creates the nightmare droning you're hearing. And in case you're curious, I looked this up out of curiosity. You can buy drone machines off the official Author and Punisher website. Why would you want to do that? Fuck you, that's why. If you're wanting to create terrifying noise that you can improvise live, he sells them. Are they expensive? You bet your ass they are. Do I want one? Oh my God, are you kidding me? I don't know what I would do with it, but I would make terrifying noise with it. A drone machine, for our context, however, is an album. And it is an album that is much, much, much closer from the Painted Army unto his later material, something like Nocturnal Birding, which, well, I'm sure we'll talk about at the end of this episode. Yes, you heard the term right. Nocturnal Birding. Let that sit in your cerebral back brain a little bit for a minute to decide what that means. So, essentially, Tristan Schoen says in an interview, multiple interviews, specifically maybe the best one is from Vice's Noisy, where he says, I got tired of trying to figure out how to find bandmates and just started making the stuff that I could do live and improvise. That's not an exact quote, by the by. Drone Machines as an album is someone finally coming into their own. This album lives up to its name in a big way. Like, Drone Machine is very drone-y. It reminds me a lot of like Sun O or kind of earlier stuff by Coil. So like, Elf or How to Destroy Angels, that album by Coil, it is very, very noisy. A song like Sand, Wind, Carcass, which is kind of my favorite track on the album, it almost sounds like a later industrial or drone metal project's like side B-side side project thing.
How slow can we make it?
How much can I beat you to death with one note? And the answer is this song is like 6.5 minutes long. Joe, you're looking at the actual number. What is the length of this song?
5 minutes and 41 seconds,
Close
according
enough.
to the lossless FLAC I purchased off of Bandcamp way back when.
Close enough. Okay, so I like this sort of stuff a lot. Yes, I am a dark ambient guy. And I think that's also because I became an industrial guy somewhere in my early life. And this album is such a great example of that, and is I'm going to make an argument about Author and Punisher. And that argument is that with every album, you can continually see shown kind of pointing at a single thing and constantly tightening that focus until such a point where I think he hits it. And I'll get to that later in the episode, where he starts to pull back and look at this thing he's created. Has he created like his own sub genre? Man, I don't know. I don't know that I want to make that argument. But the argument I will make is that he has taken an idea and pushed it to its farthest extreme that you can within a one-man band. Joe, you're a music guy, so you know what I mean when I say one-man band. I either mean one guy who's playing all the instruments, a la like early Trent Reznor, or you mean a maniac standing on the corner with like a timpani drum strapped to his back and cymbals at his knees and a machine playing like a ukulele on his back and a monkey playing a organ grinder next to him.
Dick Van Dyke turned 100 this year, by the way.
You know what? I don't say this very lightly because I am a person who is violently against celebrity culture. Good for Dick Van Dyke. Happy birthday, Dick Van Dyke, from this obscure metal podcast.
Briefly tell me, why does one listen to dark ambient? Music as a whole, when you listen to it, you're either trying to get some enjoyment or it's contributing to the background of whatever's going on in your day. We sit down and we hyper-analyze if it's something technical. Why does one sit and listen to dark ambient? My thought has always been drugs are the easy answer. Throw those away for a second. I don't want an extra for another mind-altering substance. I think about music as a mind-altering substance. I'm either listening to it for the entertainment, I'm listening to it for the musicianship, or I'm listening to it for the tone, for the feeling. It's like a horror movie. It's why soundtracks and film go so well together. Silent movies, only having the visual, it's not the whole picture. It's having the sound effects, it's having the Foley that make you feel what's going on screen. Why do you listen to dark ambient, though?
Okay, so if we're going to talk dark ambient for a second, I want to rewind historically a little bit. And I don't want to talk about dark ambient. I want to talk about ambient. What is ambient music? I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, it's kind of just tonality in the background.
It's
of the
background
thing.
noise. 100%.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
The definition of ambiance is this is the setting of this room or this song or this record, and it's not meant to be hyper-analyzed. It's meant to just be felt.
The best example of ambient music is coincidentally an album called Ambient, Albums for Airports by Brian Eno. So Eno created this set of records, I guess, with the intention of selling it to airports. Because as we all know about airports, they're stressful, they suck, no one wants to be in them, they're a pain in the ass. So why not create a kind of, I don't know, sonic palette, a background that would just be cool and chill and easy to get around in. Listen, you're waiting for a plane, you got to go through metal detectors, it's a pain in your ass. Why make it harder than anyone has to be? Dark ambient stretches off from a lot of places, right? The thing that we think of as dark ambient, Comet Height or Atrium Carceri or God Body Problem, these acts are kind of reaching a little backwards in time and just taking it forward. Atrium Carceri would go on to do Mortal Shell, the video game. They did the all the audio for that. It's fucking terrifying. Not a great game in my opinion, but they would do all of the music for it, and it's creepy and it's spooky. I think dark ambient kind of scratches an itch that, like, I say this as someone who's a big fan of David Bowie. I can only listen to so much Brian Eno produced or impacted music before I go, oh, fuck off, come on. But his ambient work is some of the coolest shit I've ever heard. Even when it's just 3 or 4 notes and a little bit of tone in the background, there is something so beautiful and so thoughtful about it. And dark ambient says, go fuck yourself. Let's make it threatening. And I like that. It's like if you could take a nap, but make it spooky.
Author and Punisher is not solely dark ambient.
No,
but
of
I
course not.
ask that question because the style of music he is creating overall, to me, feels like the same reason for creating the sound. I'm not trying to give you songs. What is a song? A song is a piece of music, generally speaking, with a pop formula background, meaning you're going to have some verses, you're going to have some choruses. It's not just about the musicians and the music they're playing, it's about the vocalist and the melody. Things that harsher versions of music tend to intentionally avoid.
Sure.
Because they're not trying to be popular. They're trying to make you uncomfortable, or they're trying to be anti something.
The question of what is music is such a beautiful question, especially in the confines of talking about metal, right? Because I think if you ask a lot of people kind of a little old, like my parents' generation or a little older, metal kind of becomes the break point, right? Because I was born in the early 80s. Those of you who are long-term fans of discography discussion are going to know that the question of things like the Satanic Panic come up in the 80s. And I think that that's only possible, not just because of the socio-political background of America in the 1980s, but because hard rock had been pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable, because rock and roll was pushing the boundaries of what was musically acceptable. When you start getting into stuff like dark ambient, like, you're kind of pushing music out to its farthest point, where it's no longer even just like Renaissance or into the Belle Epoque chamber music. You're getting to a pure tonality, a pure pursuit of a single concept or note or whatever. You know, the joke that I always heard people say about drone and metal, the intersection of metal and drone, is I love it when Sun O plays that one note. And that's kind of what took you a second, but I knew you'd get the joke.
I had to think about it. It's been a minute, my friend.
So, Author and Punisher is a really good example of what you can do when you take that thing and you push it all the way out. So, I mean, is Drone Machines dark ambient? Is it just drone, which is kind of its own element in and of itself? And you have to remember that Drone Machines came out in 2010. Like, other than Nine Inch Nails, who was starting to push towards, and you'll have to check the timeline for me, I'm not exactly sure, but started putting out the Ghosts recordings. And they had already survived somehow the Fragile, which is an album I really like. They were already pushing through a lot of that weird audio experimentation and into droney weird stuff. And when you get down to it, I think you can look at an album like Drone Machines and see the DNA of everything Author and Punisher was going to become in the future, albeit in a very nascent form, in a very, it hasn't come into birth yet. It's evolving towards this. The next album especially, good Lord, you can see the early edges of what Author and Punisher was going to create and how they were going to push this idea of drone within electronic and within heavy metal to a new, different, wholly ugly place.
2012, Ursus Americanus.
For those of you keeping score at home, Ursus Americanus, what the fuck is that? That's a black bear. That's the American black bear. Why did he name the album Ursus Americanus, referencing a black bear?
Because it sounds cool.
Have you ever watched something be attacked by an animal like a bear?
I'm more afraid of a grizzly than a black bear, but I'm still not going to start anything if that's what you mean.
Fuck no. For those of you who are not from the Midwest of the United States, black bears are scary and they're big. But compared to something farther west like a grizzly bear, they're not that big. But if one were staring you down, it'd be plenty fucking big. But I think it's interesting that he starts the album Ursus Americanus with a song called Terror Bird. Joe, do you know what a terror bird is?
That was a pterodactyl.
Not exactly.
If we go all the way back, right?
So the terror birds were a kind of subspecies of kind of proto-bird dinosaurs that look like, they look like a black metal ostrich. Is the only way I can describe.
Oh my God, that's a great name for a band, by the way.
Black metal ostrich.
You need to copyright that right now, sir.
Okay, so terror birds were giant proto birds who were fucking incredibly. Okay, Joe is, for the record, pulling up photos of terror birds on Google to look at what archaeologists say terror birds look like. They were giant fucking birds who were terrifying that kind of bridged the gap between modern predatory.
Looks like Toucan Sam has been working out.
It looks like Toucan Sam decided that it liked exclusively listening to Mayhem albums.
I told you to follow your nose and you didn't listen.
And now it's going to just murder the shit out of you. So Terror Bird is such a great title for this song, especially if you've seen the music video for Author and Punisher's Terror Bird. It's a miniature horror film, and it's about some giant beaked monster. I won't spoil it for the rest of you. But it begins to show that Tristan Schoen's actually more than just some industrial noise-obsessed weirdo. He actually gives a shit about song structure. Sort of. Song structure takes a backseat to whatever evil whim he has in the process of a recording. But Terror Bird's a great introduction. It's not what I would pick first for someone who wants to hear Author and Punisher, but it's a great introduction to this is kind of what you're getting into. Either you like it or you don't.
It's very easy to hear something like this blind and associate it with every other doom, over the top, I'm being dirgy for the sake of being dirgy band, that no matter how many words you put on the piece of paper, you're not saying any of that. It takes a little bit of education and understanding. What you're hearing is not somebody making something to sound bad on purpose. What you have is somebody who wants to compose a rumble. They want to give you that feeling of anxiety and panic and pull you through whatever's in the back of your brain, but it's actually being done by a human. This is the difference between I have a drum pad and some sticks and I'm playing a beat that might sound artificial and programming that same beat so that it is grid aligned perfect and there are no fucking variations. This is variations in the dirge, in the pain and the anxiety of what's going on. If what you're doing is standing in front of that speaker and you're being subjected to those slams over and over and over again.
Well, when you talk about programmed beats, one of the things that comes to mind for me is that you're often talking about a feeling that's very cold. Like danceable beats, they don't feel good. You can dance to them, they're rhythmic, you can move to them, but they are not in and of themselves very emotive, right? Like,
right.
You and I have joked a lot about KMFDM that they have like two different beats. And they're basically the fucking.
Don't forget the do.
Yeah. It is.
I love that song, by the way.
It is basically evil disco.
It's pretty much it.
Whereas the rhythms on Ursus Americanus and kind of into his later albums, they are not cold. They're hot. They're heated. But they are not hot in the, oh, this is a sexy thing I can dance to. It's heated in the way an aluminum mill is heated. It sucks. It's unpleasant. You can't do anything to cool off because you'll cause an explosion.
There is some very dark gas in the room that we cannot inhale, so you better get your respirator, and you better make sure it has a fresh filter.
Right. This is the rare sort of industrial music where wearing a gas mask is not a fashion statement. It's a necessity. Author and Punisher, especially in their early output, is the exact sort of music that requires OSHA regulations. If you are fucking with a drone machine for too long, you might you might lose your fingers. And I say that as someone who used to be a meat cutter. But that's the beauty part of it, right? Like Ursus Americanus is an unforgiving album in a lot of way. It lacks that dirge-like slowness that you've been kind of hammering on about, but it doesn't mean that it moves quick. There is a particular track on this album called Below You and Above You, and it's a real oddball on the album. It almost feels like an outtake from the Daughters album, You Won't Get What You Want. It's glitchy, and it's noisy, and it's weird, and it would almost be comforting if it weren't Author and Punisher. Spoiler alert. This track is anything but comforting. This just finds it...
Starts off nice.
Well, sure.
And then Author and Punisher shows up.
And then it becomes an Author and Punisher track. And that's the thing I love about this so much. You can never be comfortable while listening to this album. Like, listen, I have very broad musical tastes. If you want to be comfortable, put on Etta James. Put on Tori Amos. Put on some Piano Sonata. If you want to be scared for your life at 2 a.m., put on Author and Punisher. It is so brilliant in that regard. And here again, there is a thing that happens kind of going forward after the Painted Army and Drone Machines. You can begin to see all of the places he was going to go. And it leaves you to wonder, like, what awful tricks does this man have up his sleeve? And the only thing that constrains a really good artist is the availability of tools. And this is a classic example of that. Ah, yes. Listen to this cozy little beat in the background. It's almost lo-fi beats to chill or whatever to on YouTube until it's not.
Yeah.
And that's and that is something just as a media consumer that I really love.
It's unfair to assume that anybody is setting out to create background music. Though that does exist, I don't think Author and Punisher is ever trying to create background music. But there is a difference between Ursus Americanus and what came before. Though Drone Machines was laying the foundation and it was going to tell you where this is going, we're kind of locked in at this point to how many minutes do I have to get all of the emotions out of myself that I have for this recording session. Because one of my biggest complaints begins on the next record, 2013, Women and Children. And that complaint is, as the overall presentation improves, there is something to be said about post-production and mastering on any record. Doesn't matter how lo-fi or hi-fi you claim to be. If it's not balanced, it's a challenge to listen to. And there are plenty of independently created records from this time frame and years prior that are intentionally bad. And that's supposed to be part of the appeal. And yes, sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's interesting, sometimes the art is worth it. But we're going to see the vocals take more and more a backseat to the overall tone of the drone. Okay. And I don't know that that's an oversight. It's not like he independently decided, you know what I'm going to do today? I'm going to, well, you know what? I want this rumble to be just a little bit louder, and he doesn't notice. I think it's an intentional choice of, my voice is capable of making this frequency range of sounds. I have more to say with the bottom end than I do with the top end. So let me pull these back a little bit and keep the ambient feeling going.
So I don't know that I'm going to say I'm going to disagree with you here, but I'm going to kind of offers maybe some context around how I think this album works. So I think in a parallel universe to ours, Tristan Schoen right about this time starts creating the world's greatest horror movie scores. But instead of doing that in our dimension, Tristan Schoen has gone on to create this album called Women and Children, which might be my favorite Author and Punisher album. And so understand that I am not able to separate my own bias towards this album away from the rest of his material. But I really love this album for a lot of reasons. This album, compared to its predecessor, Ursus Americanus, is much more alien and much more hard to connect to. It is way closer to the industrial sound of a particular era, right? This is way closer to the works of a band like Coil in the late 90s, or closer to like the Tear Garden. It's way less immediately offensive and way more atmospheric in a way that I don't think a lot of people could do. In a sense, I think that this album begins actually showing what he can do with his voice, but not as a lyricist, though I think he becomes actually a pretty interesting lyricist later on. I think this shows off more and more of him using the human voice, especially when heavily processed the way he does, as a separate musical instrument. Case in point. So the way Schoen records a lot of his vocals is not through a microphone through a pop filter in a studio, the way that Joe and I are literally right now having this conversation. He's using all of these kind of bespoke, handmade microphone devices. If you've seen the video,
I'll allow it, sir. That's a great description of what he has at this time.
Right. So if you see the video for a song like Nihil Strength, he is standing, and that's from the Future album. He is standing in front of this kind of rectangular structure that hangs around his mouth that he is moving his mouth on either side of to get different tonalities, because they're all hooked up to different receivers, creating different vocal synthesis. On top of that, he is beginning to develop what can only be best described, and Joe, you'll have to, hopefully this will show up in the production, as a throat microphone. He is holding a number of microphones attached to his throat by elastic. And that is catching the sounds around not just his vocal cords, but around his windpipe and the varying structures that create the throat. And now on top of that, because it's Author and Punisher, he is distorting those sounds and playing with them so they become their own bass rumble or their own percussion instrument. Because, you know, in a sense, vocal cords are a weird, fleshy production of a percussion instrument.
We keep mentioning that noisy interview. I think we're going to have to link to it in the show notes because
it's so worth listening to.
There is something to be said for his explanation and what he's thinking. And you mentioned the throat mic. How many different ways can I make sounds that I can then distort and amplify and otherwise fuck up? And he started doing that because he found out there's some special forces tactics of using throat mics to speak underwater. Maybe I'm paraphrasing and combining two things together, but ultimately, how many different ways can I do this? And how many different ways can I wire up an interface to make it convenient? Because for somebody who is articulating with one arm, the rhythm that you're hearing, he's also using triggers on that same hand to come up with different sounds. At this point, it's like a grid. It's like somebody took a tape measure and broke out all of the inches and quarter inches and half inch and eighth inch into different grids so that when you hear something that sounds like it's sequenced on an Author and Punisher record at this point, it probably isn't. It's probably just him using the control interface is what I'm going to call it.
Yeah.
So it's all happening in real time. What I don't understand listening to this is how do you plan some of these things? Do you just sit down with your homemade heavy, he mentions the weight of what he's made, your heavy interface, and you just pick different sounds and put them together and just see what you can do, modulating the volume and modulating the pitch? Or do you sit down and say, these are the ideas I want to put together, let me go execute it? Because I don't want to suggest he's not writing his music, but how do you write this?
I suspect very strongly that when you're talking about anyone who is maniacal enough to design their own instruments, or, I mean, fuck it, let's be a little uncharitable. And I don't say this as someone who dislikes this music. Clearly, I'm a fan. But let's assume that he's just developed a lot of very unique, extremely expensive, and probably pretty heavy MIDI triggers. This is still a man designing his own electronic interfaces to make music with. There might be an element of sitting down, you have a rough idea in your head, and you're noodling with your instrument. You're a guitarist, Joe. I'm sure you've sat down one night and said, fuck it, I've got a thing on my mind, and I don't know what it is yet, but I'm going to put down with my acoustic guitar and a pick, and maybe if you're feeling a little spicy, you might have a metronome going just to give you a rough rhythm.
You change a tuning, you turn some knobs, you look for something that you've never heard before, and you try to build upon it.
Precisely. I suspect there is an element of that, because especially as Women and Children and some of the later albums go, it is increasingly musical. That is not to say loaded with pop sensibility, but it is increasingly musical. It is less and less just pure noise.
Right, we left the Painted Army back there somewhere 8 years ago.
Yeah, and for the record, that's not me picking on that album. It's just clearly the early work of someone who is figuring some shit out. And Drone Machines, as much as an album that I enjoy, is a lot more pure noise. I think of this album as someone who has kind of fallen into the fact that, hey, I'm an experimental musician, ultimately. I'm playing with new ideas, new concepts, and frankly, new instruments in this new way. Even then, there is only so many ways you can play music, right? Think about an instrument like the sitar. You're talking about an instrument with music, with moving frets that has hundreds of ways you can play and tune it. But still, it only has so many strings, so many frets, so many keys that you can operate. Go to the other side of Asia. Look at gamelan, something like they play in Indonesia, which will show up a little bit in later Author and Punisher albums. Has a much smaller scale. It has much less available notation compared to the Western scale, or even way out into the subcontinent of India with the way they have this massive musical scale. There's still only so many ways you can make beeps and boops and clangs and clacks. He's finding all of them within this wholly new environment and with these wholly new apparatus. Because I want to call the Drone Machines an instrument, but I am, as it turns out, not a musician. So I want to say tool or apparatus. I suspect there is an element of just fucking around and experimenting. Saying this as someone who has done digital visual art at varying points in his life, there is an element of not every time I've sat down to create something, it's been a masterpiece. Most of the time, it sucked. But if you're getting 1 out of 10, that like, oh, hey, there's a cool idea here, that's pretty good. Speaking as a photographer, there's this idea of the 90-10 rule that if you take 100 photos in an afternoon, 90 are just shit. They're just not even worth printing. 10 are pretty good. And then the 90-10 rule applies again. Of those 10 photos that are pretty good, 9 are going to be not worth printing, but one's worth holding on to. One's really good. I suspect there's got to be that element of it. And here again, I am not playing with a drone machine as much as I'd like to. It is got to be a process of its own, and every musician's going to come to its own. I will say that Women and Children as an album, it kind of follows the same thing that he does from Drone Machines onward. you can hear that he's pushing towards something. There's an evolved state that he is reaching or growing towards. And the next album, which I feel like you're getting ready to push us towards.
Say it out loud, my friend. 2015.
Milk and Honing. Or, for those of us who speak English, Milk and Honey. Now, the term milk and honey is something you've probably heard before. If you grew up in and around churches or just around literary people, you've heard the expression milk and honey. Typically, as it relates to the book of Exodus, it's referring to this idea of a land of luxury and wealth where milk and honey, two at the time extremely expensive items, would be free and available, that you could just get them anywhere. Also, I don't know much about what Tristan Schoen was thinking about when he came up with this idea, but Milk and Honey is also apparently a title of a Rudyard Kipling piece that I've never read. So maybe there's a greater, weirder thing he's saying about whatever Kipling was on that afternoon. But Milk and Honing is a very, very weird album.
You did a very good job selling me on Women and Children. I know you mentioned that's your favorite album in the discography.
Yeah.
When you sit and listen to Author and Punisher, when I sit and listen to Author and Punisher, I don't think it's meant to be consumed as a whole.
Sure.
So I start to listen for things I can discern a difference. I don't like listening to it thinking it's all the same when it's not. There's either a different idea that's trying to be conveyed, there's a different sound, there's a different tone. Something has to stand out and make this sound different. While Women and Children, to me, didn't really step apart from Ursus Americanus sonically. He learned something.
Yeah.
And Milk and Honing sounded different to me.
I agree. I said that Women and Children is very closer to a more classical is the wrong word, but more of an industrial album of a particular time period. Milk and Honing is him taking all of these lessons and turning it less of the scalpel that Women and Children is and turning it into a sledge. He's getting ready to beat you to death with this album, and boy howdy, does he beat you to death with this album. This might be my actual least favorite Author and Punisher album.
Really?
Yeah, but that's not to say it's a bad album. I like Milk and Honing. It's just not my favorite of the batch. It is one of these things where, compared to the last album, which I flinch a little at calling Author and Punisher subtle. It is profoundly unsubtle music. If it is dark ambient, as we were talking earlier, it is the least form of subtle ambient music. It is anything but. However, I think this album, if you were to take equal parts, this album and Women and Children, you can go, oh shit, this is where this guy was going. This is where he was going to push us to in 2025. Holy shit. This album's kind of brilliant. This is not the background music of a horror movie. It is the horror movie.
I hesitate to say this is a new starting line for one person who is not only trying to outdirge his peers,
yeah,
but he's spent enough time figuring out the mechanics of what he wants to do. There's aspects of this doom and dirge and heavy that he is honing in on, and he figured out how to do it. But now I don't have a better way to say it, he's figured out how to make you feel it also.
Yes.
And it might just be the mechanics of what he's doing, but I hear something like this and I hear it's meant to be consumed as background music because you're not supposed to be focusing on any one particular thing. It's supposed to be helping you get through your day. But this is the first time it feels like you're supposed to listen to this while dragging a very heavy object behind you through your day, good fucking luck. You strapped on a ball and chain and go.
It's less a ball and chain, and it's more the anchor for a British warboat from the 1700s. This album, I'm weirdly, I think the place where this album begins to shine is in the use of vocals. Very specifically, there is a song on this album called Future Man, which I know what metalheads and rock and roll heads are thinking. They're thinking, oh, a man of the future. And my answer is...
Right, you already said David Bowie, right?
And my answer is, tough fucking luck, pal. This is anything but. This album, he's using his voice not as just another form of percussion or just another way to make weird, terrifying, alienating sounds, but he's singing. He's singing very discordantly. He's singing with a bunch of microphones wrapped around his throat. He's singing like he's doing this entire thing at gunpoint, but he's singing. And what he's singing is an absolute middle finger to the entire future. And I fucking love it.
We're finally getting back to the point where the lyrics mean something.
Yeah.
And we've talked briefly about the lyrics of Author and Punisher. Yeah, for the last couple records, it's been more the voice as an instrument.
Yes.
And I've always been a proponent of, if I can't understand what you're saying, reading it doesn't make it better for me.
Yeah.
I should be able to fully grasp what this song is about. And it's unfair to lay that down as a hard line, so it's definitely not a hard line for me. But if you've been with us on this journey, and this is the latest Author and Punisher that you've picked up, you're surprised that he's so understandable. Like I said, it sounds like he figured something out on the last one, where it's not just about creating the onslaught of audio, but it's like when you have that breakthrough moment dialing in the EQ on a live sound mix. Like, oh, I get it now. I know what each of these numbers sounds like and feels like, and now I can manipulate the whole soundscape, not just everything from 50 to 75 and then 75 to 100.
Yeah. And that's kind of a neat thing to watch. Like, it's one thing that I love about kind of long-lasting either musicians or musical projects, right? You can really point to a thing where you say, here's a turning point in their career. Now, look, we're all fairly media savvy. We all know that if you have 10 or 11 songs on an album that are really good, there's like another 14 that were just kind of
Definitely in the old school. Absolutely.
Yeah. B-sides are not great for the most part. Most B-sides are totally forgettable. I remember listening to Henry Rollins talk about, if you put me in a studio and you put a guitar and a beat in front of me, I can come up with some vocals, but it might just be like moon, June, spoon. It's just me trying. But there is a certain level with this album specifically and everything kind of going forward where even if you can't quite follow what he's singing, there's something more traditionally musical. Because on the whole, for an album, for what is ostensibly music, it is a rejection in many ways of music's early conventions, especially rock and roll, which is so locked in to guitar, bass, drum, vocal. He has thrown out like 90% of the actual structure of that. He's thrown out so much of the literal mechanical framing of what a music producing item is. Think about it. Think about an acoustic guitar. It is a hollow frame with metallic cord strung across it that creates vibrations over a hollow body. This is true of most musical instruments everywhere on the planet. And the drone machines, as utilized by Author and Punisher, are going, but what if not? And
what if all I have is this electrical sine wave?
Yes.
And
yes.
this is what you've got.
Well, and so earlier in the episode, I was joking about this being like dubstep's evil cousin, basically. And while that's a joke, it's kind of also serious because he's oftentimes taking a single note. Wah, and wub, 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 across it with all of these different extremely physical tools. It's almost like taking a tuning fork and then bending the tuning fork as violently as you can while it's still vibrating. So I think this album, one, it's anything but sweet like milk and honey, but at the same time, it does point towards a lot of what he was thinking. It is still rich. It is still dense, and it is pointing you towards, I don't know if it's the best entry point in his oeuvre, in his whole canon, but it is also pointing you towards something that is fully evolved. And whether that full evolution is a great artist or just a musical predator, well...
And what a beautiful time it was the first time I heard Beastland 2018.
I think this album may have been kind of the first time he was picked up and heard in a popular way. And describing, any music from 2018 up until now, and probably a whole decade before, the studio system is not what it used to be. When you listen to, this is something you and I have been joking about most of this afternoon, an album like Dr. Feelgood, there was a studio system that was telling you that these 50 albums are coming out this year from our label, and you will hear them and you will like them or you won't. But that didn't mean that there weren't only 50 bands, 10 of whom were rock and roll. There was thousands, if not millions, of rock and roll artists around the world doing their own thing to varying degrees, not of success, but popularity. Beastland, to me, kind of represents the first time that you could just plug the words author and Punisher in a Google search or a YouTube search and pull up a music video. It is... Beastland is maybe author and Punisher kind of at its first full evolution. There's a lot of unique elements in this album that I don't hear either from his earlier albums or from the industrial genre, or from kind of music at large. Yes, he's still kind of using a lot of very simple tones that are just modulated and beaten with these really intense, kind of, as simple as maybe not the right words, but more direct rhythms. But there's something going on beneath the surface of Beastland. There is, for lack of a better term, finally a heartbeat behind the machine. This album is not cyberpunk, it's just cybernetic.
Something happens to you when you're a performer where you make the best effort you can, you do your rehearsals, and you show up to your first gig. If you're an artist, if you're a dancer, I don't care what type of artistic expression or entertainment you are putting all of your effort into. There comes a time where you get to the 10th gig, or the 20th gig, or the 4th gig of the week, and you feel tired. It's like exercising. You're at that point where your beginner gains are behind you, and now work feels less productive because I've had to set this thing up so many fucking times.
A sense of plateauing.
It absolutely sounds like this record comes from 10 plus years of experience creating Author and Punisher. And like you said, he's getting noticed. So now more people are paying attention to what you're doing. It's that moment where you hit 10,000 hours and you learn to slow down a bit. But this is Author and Punisher. We've slowed down before.
It's mostly slow, actually.
So now the heartbeat is there. And I think it comes from playing the previous material in front of people and there not being a lot there from a tempo perspective. Each album singularly stands as this sonic feeling or this sonic emotion. So none of it is exclusively dark ambient or exclusively industrial with a beat. But sometimes you start the train and then it stops. Beastland has a heartbeat. It has a feeling, and it is intended to resonate with you, the first-time listener. Beastland might be the best album one for Author and Punisher. It's not my favorite record, but it's a good, what is this band? Go listen to Beastland, and you'll get the idea real quick.
I disagree on one level. It is, again, maybe the first fully formed Author and Punisher album in my mind. I'm sure if you asked Tristan Schoen, he'd tell you a different story. But it is the first a point where I would say this is really what you can kind of see the rest of his future, or at least the rest of the future that we've seen, because I don't think he's done, that you're going to really go, oh, okay, got it. There's a thing that you brought up, this idea of, you've played your 10th gig, now you've played your 4th gig of the week, which is like gig number 63. You've done this 100 times. There's this idea in kind of traditional Japanese physical culture of misogi, and it comes from a spiritual practice. Most people who have any sense of what misogi is, it is like standing under a waterfall or in a river chanting over and over again. And a lot of times misogi gets written off as this idea of like ritual or spiritual purification. But misogi is also about being put under the most tremendous of strains and having to work hard and hard and hard. So where your physical body gives out, but something else emerges, your spirit kind of comes forward, or some inner resolve comes out and you can manage the thing you're doing. Like using Niall's Strength as an example, it is a song that should not work. There's like 10 lyrics in the whole song. It is mostly him shrieking the words Niall's Strength. It is fucking terrifying at louder volumes. It rattles you to your spine. But it's a great song. It is a fucking cool song. And I would say anyone who's early in their Author and Punisher listening experience needs to listen to Niall's Strength loud. As loud as you can handle it, and maybe just a little past what you can handle, and you'll go, oh, that's Author and Punisher. I think there's an interesting thing there, right? Because this is the man who's finally gone, this is what I'm doing. And not just this is what I'm doing, I've found an audience too. Because, Author and Punisher... I
did an interview on the internet once, and now people see this and think, damn, that's awesome.
And someday, Joe, someone will do the same with me, and I won't do anything nearly as cool as Niall's Strength. However...
put that goth makeup back on, sir.
Shut up! Stop bringing that... Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Did that come out loud? Did I do that out loud? Whoops. No, so... I'm trying to push through that joke.
Oh, come on.
Okay, so... I do think, though, that there is a level of this album that is just so wild and so dark. And I don't know if I want to call it the lead single, but it's the song that to me is most emblematic of this album. The Speaker is Systematically Blown shows you what a good musician that could come out of this. And that there is like, oh, I can do song structure. I can do choruses. I can do bridges. I can do hooks. But fuck you, I'm doing it on my own terms. Fuck you, I'm doing this as Author and Punisher. And if you like it, great. If you don't, then you need to put your earplugs in a little tighter and get the fuck out of my venue. I love this song so much. It's almost like I don't do pump-up songs to go work out. But this is the pump-up song before I burn a village to the ground. It's just one of the most intense things I've ever heard. And I remember reading or hearing an interview where he said, like, this song is such a strain to do live because I'm having to push my voice up to a level I don't normally do. I think later in his career that might not be true. I think if you were to ask him, like, hey, on your later albums, you sing a lot more than you do. Is it pitch? Or is it just that at that point in time you were mostly just screaming one or two things and that was it? I don't know. I've never strapped a microphone to my throat and yelled at the top of my voice to know how that ends up working.
You have a different experience as a performer.
Oh, yeah.
With different types of microphones. And I don't have pictures to verify this, but if he's still using the curved
box
speech apparatus with 8 mic capsules in it, at one point only 2 of them were hooked up, that takes a lot more air and a lot more diaphragm than what he later does with the gas mask, which fucking looks cool, and it's on the cover of this album, so maybe this was the first time he did that. It's different, and you do get some experience learning to calm down. One of the hardest things to do live, especially if you're playing fucking metal or rock or punk or anything. Everybody is trying to be the most extreme, the heaviest, the loudest.
Yeah.
And when you learn the difference between singing and singing with good technique, you feel like you're doing it quieter. But really what's happening is you're putting more force, more diaphragm, and more air behind it than anything you could do manufacturing that sound in your own throat. So there's a little bit of, this was hard to do at the time, but then you learn, how do I not destroy my voice every night of the week doing this 3 or 4 times for however long the tour is? And I've had one live experience with Author and Punisher little bit after this, and I gotta say, it's pretty fucking cool to see live. I kind of wish he would do something in the round where he's in the center of the room and everything that's going on, whether that's, God, can you dance to this?
You can, but should you?
Can you rave to this? Does that count? I'm not allowed to say rave on Author and Punisher, am I?
You know what? I'm not going to tell you what you can and can't say unless it's either directly legally actionable or a thing that I'm going to have to come out and say, like, I don't know where Joe came from with that. I refuse to acknowledge that he is that person, and I'm walking away from discography discussion.
Just
after one
imagine
episode.
a giant, like, room-sized circle pit, and Author and Punisher's in the center of it. That would be fucking cool.
An Author and Punisher rave would be a rave where all of the glow sticks were black light.
That's really bad for your eyes. You know that, right?
I didn't say it was good for you. I almost feel like every time you're like, man, Author and Punisher, they're heavy and they're loud and they beat the shit out of you. You almost want to like turn around and look at the person and go, did I say anything about survival?
2022. Crueler.
Ah, yes. When I first saw that this album was coming out and the name that had been announced, Crueler, my thought was, okay, does that mean like cruel but more so? We are being crueler than normal? Or are we talking about a buttermilk industrial donut? I don't think he's ever answered that question. And
I look forward to you asking him that question.
Mr. Schoen, Tristan, did you mean buttermilk industrial donut, or did you mean I'm being more cruel than usual? Because if you meant that you were being more cruel than usual, I've got to level with you. I don't know who I'm talking. Am I still talking to Tristan Schoen here? I feel like this album is maybe the most approachable Author and Punisher album. It is the most, in the strictest sense of the word, melodic. It is maybe the most ambient, and not in the sense of the ambience of a factory behind you, but just an kind of ambient, atmospheric album. It is not gothic in the sense of goth music. It is gothic in the sense of massive and sprawling and inspirational but terrifying in the way a gothic cathedral is gothic. The album art for this is kind of a pop art armored personnel carrier. And I really feel that it's appropriate that that's the art, because this album feels like some sort of post-apocalyptic personnel carrier moving across a blasted wasteland, but doing so romantically. And it's very strange because, you know, I was joking about how eventually Author and Punisher sounds cybernetic in the sense of flesh and machine finally fusing. This is the conscience of that machine. This is the heart beneath it, not in the sense of the organ, the heart, but the spiritual heart of a thing, which is simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. The first track, Drone Carrying Dread, is, man, I almost want to say that the phrase drone carrying dread is like, for lack of a better term, an author's statement about their work. It is an artist's statement.
It does feel like a preface.
Yes. I am this drone, this audio, the singular audio note that's in the background that is a singular thing that you're hearing is carrying an unease, a sense of violence in the future that you just haven't reached yet. But that's not entirely true of this album, though this album certainly has moments where it feels like you're being run over by a heavy vehicle. It is doing a thing that is so different than the rest of his discography. It doesn't feel like a deviation, though. It just feels like, by the way, I can do this too.
It feels like, yes, this is what I do, and I have more to say, and I'm allowing myself to say a little bit more. You mentioned cyber and flesh, and I immediately got I have no mouth and I'm a scream vibes.
Yes.
With not that Author and Punisher is I Am, because I Am is absolutely horrible, like beyond comprehension horrible in that story. But the feeling of dread that is hiding behind the feeling of happy. The melody gives you some relief, but you're still being chased by this fucking train.
Yes. So there's another kind of modern industrial band that I'm a great big fan of called Health. Hopefully in the future of Discography, we'll talk Health at some point.
I'll put it on the list now, sir.
They're such a weird and interesting and fun band. I kind of view Health and Author and Punisher as kind of two sides of the same coin in many ways. We've been joking about how do you dance to Author and Punisher. You can dance to Health. A lot of their stuff, especially their later material, is very danceable, I think. This album is not, and never will be. If you can dance to Incinerator, I feel like you should first put down the knife and let's talk, but I need you to be cool.
All jokes aside,
yeah,
where preconceived notions exist with every genre of music, Author and Punisher is doom, metal, dirge. It's like jazz to me. You're not supposed to sit down and pick the greatest hits, which you can do with your favorite rock band or your favorite hard rock band or heavy metal. Pick your genre. It's out there, and we all do it. But why do we listen to something like this? We either need some background noise or some distraction, or we need to do nothing else but sit down, get a beverage of choice, maybe leave a small lamp on or some candles for ambience.
Sure.
And you listen to this because you want to go somewhere. And it's hard to say what that is for everybody. But Crueller's a really good place to talk about how you can do that with this band. And maybe this is the best album overall. It's not my favorite, but there is something to be said for, no matter how heavy you are, no matter how loud you are, no matter how fast you are, for something to be intense, it has to be next to something that is not so. And to me, this is the best example of Author and Punisher fully realized the drone machine, but I'm using your own tricks against you. I'm using melody to build the soundscape, not removing the melody to create as much dirge as possible and just chase you with that train.
Yeah. Here again, we were joking earlier about, I don't know that Author and Punisher is ever going to display pop sensibility. This is as close as we get. And I'm in this very weird boat kind of personally because like a lot of people who grew up in the Midwest, my earliest musical exposures is actually very pop oriented. My father was a great big fan of the Beatles. So I ended up hearing a lot of Beatles, a lot of Stones, a lot of Gordon Lightfoot, stuff that is very songwriter oriented, that is very musical in a sense from 1948 until about 1975.
Conventionally.
Yes, conventional rock and roll. And a lot of my tastes come from being a guy, a kid, who grew up with that being then exposed to like hip hop and techno and kind of the earlier eras where it was getting away from guitar, drum, bass, or saxophone, trumpet, stand-up bass, big band. When you start getting away from that stuff and getting into experimental music, it's kind of like getting into experimental art of any variety, like experimental cinema, where a movie stops being a movie and becomes a piece of art.
We're not abolishing your education of music.
Yes.
But we are taking away the majority of your expectations and giving you a chance to experience something for the first time again, rather than walk in the room and say, yep, I know how this is going to go.
Right, precisely. Industrial's a great place for that, just kind of as a genre, if you take out like 2002 to like 2010.
And again, every genre is just a variation on something else that one person picks and says, I like that.
Yeah.
I want to do that this way.
Well, and I think Crueller's a great place for that because it is a little more accessible. There's two tracks on this album that I think are kind of like, if I'm going to point to someone and say, this will be the easiest thing in the oeuvre you can listen to, start here. It's track 4, Maiden Star, which is the lead single on the album, if memory serves me correctly, as much as any album has a lead single anymore.
Author and Punisher lead single.
Yeah, I know, it's a little strange.
Didn't think I'd have to say those words today.
It's a cool song, though. Like, it's not my favorite song on this album, not by a long shot, but it is very, very cool and gives you an idea of what he can do creating a song that's almost a ballad. I was joking as I was listening to this earlier this week, his whole discography, that on Women and Children, there's a song called Tame as a Lion, which to me sounds like a ballad written by Ted Bundy. This is almost just a straight up ballad. And it's pretty in a way. It's glimmering. It's shimmering. It's bright, but it's bright in the way that a mirror with a flashlight being shined at it is a little bright.
I have these thoughts when I listen to any artist that, to me, mixes well with something else. And you think to yourself, back in the day, you already mentioned the Beatles and that entire generation of musicians. They all played with each other on their records. So you've probably heard a song more than once today, if you've been out in public, that, it says George Harrison on it, but there's probably more than one Beatle playing on that track.
Sure.
And thankfully, as modern music and even metal, and YouTube really has helped this, you get a lot of individual contributors who get together and just do something. And this track, to me, inspires the idea, what would happen if Author and Punisher decided to create music, but with someone else or with different people?
Yeah.
And to oversimplify it, clearly he can do it on his own, but you are a very melodic singer, or you're a very melodic keyboardist, or you create synth pop, whatever it is. What if instead of hiring a conventional drummer, you say, Author and Punisher is the drums on this? This is what it would sound like, and you know what? I would take an entire album of this tomorrow.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because it is something that shows up on the next and the most recent album. But this is also one of the first places where he has a clear contributor. Specifically, Justin Chancellor of Tool shows up on this album.
That explains it.
Yeah. So he opened for Tool for a bunch of tour dates, which, having seen Tool live a couple of times, and the time that I saw them last, Melt Banana opened for them. So, if you've been to a Tool live performance, you're aware that the opening act tends to be diverse. And, don't take that as me digging at Melt Banana. One, I don't know enough about them to point to it, but it was like, I walked in and I saw them and I was like, oh, yeah, well, I guess this is a Tool show, isn't it? So you can see where having other musicians in the mix, to do this album live, he's had to have a touring guitarist come with him because there's some stuff on here that can't be done with a drone machine or a dub machine. So you've got to have a guitarist there.
Not with that attitude, sir.
Well, not with that attitude. You're right. You know, where is his get up and go very slowly with a grinding industrial? I don't know where that joke's going. Right. So, but you can kind of hear this is what happens when a very deeply solitary artist goes, fuck it, I trust a guitarist just this once.
It only took 17 years, but we're getting back to it.
I mean, Joe, our podcasting collaboration is me eventually going, well, I trust someone else to handle my voice. I get it. I'm sympathetic. I get what it's like to be a profoundly asocial human being who also eventually creatively trusts another person. And in a way, this album does that. And the next track I want to highlight on this album is one I kind of do through gritted teeth, but it's one that's really funny, and that is Glory Box. Now, fans of non-metal who like trip-hop or a slightly, I don't know, maybe a little jazzier, a little sexier kind of music are going, did he fucking cover Portishead? And the answer is yeah.
Yes. He did.
He did. And if you're wondering, what does doom industrial Portishead sound like? Well, Exhibit A, Glory Box.
Congratulations. You now have expectations for, oh my God, I need this every day for the rest of my life. Where is it? Oh, this is the only one? Fuck you.
Or you're like me and you're going, this song wooed me to sleep so many nights during my incredibly jangly, upsetting 20s. Going, oh, someone covered that? Oh, okay. Well, I guess this song's really sad and angry now. But then hearing his incredibly tortured, pained voice screaming, I just want to feel like a woman is really funny.
Yeah.
Just the context of it is so weird because you're not expecting post-apocalyptic armored personnel carrier across the blasted wasteland with someone plaintively singing, I just want to be a woman. It's so... I've heard people describe some music as sweet and sour, you know.
Oh, God. Insert Shania Twain joke here.
I was going to say Tom Waits' early output. You have these really sweet, beautiful melodies, and a guy whose voice sounds like leather dried in a smokehouse and then run over by a 57 Studebaker.
Hey, I told you, the piano has been drinking, not me.
However, this is classic sweet and sour, only it's all sour. You've replaced all that sugar with just powdered citric acid, and this is what you get out of it.
Just have a spoon and a bowl. Leave me alone!
Promptly followed by a man vomiting up pure citric acid, which, sounds great. But we can't dwell here long. We have one last album we got to cover.
Indeed, my friend. 2025. What a year it was. Author and Punisher brought us Nocturnal Birding.
Oh, man. So this album came out late last year.
Here we go again.
And I went, okay, it's Author and Punisher.
Please stop topping yourself, sir.
Right.
You're doing exactly what fans want you to do. The same thing, only better or different enough that we perk our ears up and listen. As soon as you say, I really don't want to like this, 3 seconds later, you have no choice but to, oh man.
Now, I know
this is something that we're embracing more melody.
Sort of. I know what you're thinking, audience, because you're like me, I'm sure. And if you are, I'm sorry.
Angry that your favorite artist isn't doing exactly the same thing they did on the last record?
Not at all true. You're at home thinking, I've really loved this industrial doom metal power noise thing that he's been doing, this one-man band with a bunch of machinery thing. But what if he got really into hiking and decided bird songs were really cool and then said, now would be an awesome time to start collaborating with other musicians, but I'm going to do that in an album that is entirely about bird songs. You're a normal human being. That's exactly what you've thought. You've thought that 3 times in the past week, haven't you?
Absolutely.
So, Nocturnal Birding 2025. In a recent interview, Tristan Schoen says, I got into hiking during the pandemic, and I started really listening to bird sounds as I was hiking. And I started incorporating that into music. And that's why you have song titles like Titanus, Mute Swan, Titmouse, Thrush. Yeah, those are all bird names. This album shouldn't work at all. And yet, this album is the closest thing to duets as you're going to get, because a lot of these albums feature other musicians coming in to add something or to temper something. And I think the best song on this album for that is Titanus.
And again, to take this to the next place. Okay, man, you've dirged. You've dirged so much. There is nothing bad about that sound. There has to be a point where you do the awkward collaboration, but this is electronic at its core. It becomes less awkward. It's not like Yngwie Malmsteen playing with an orchestra at full volume and feedback, because single coil pickups that loud, they feed back a lot.
Yeah.
This is, let me mix what I'm doing with what you do. And because it's electronic, because it's industrial, and again, because he's playing it himself, you can create a single soundscape or a single picture. And you can take the one-man contribution 20 years on and start composing what some would argue is better music. I don't think it's the best, but I'm not dissatisfied with it going in a different direction. If it takes 20 years to get all of your individual thoughts and ideas out, and now you can start bringing in more people to create a bigger, better, more appealing. I hate saying that because there is something about melody that is always going to be more appealing to the majority of listeners.
Yeah.
And I think you have to do that. Otherwise, you're just going to show up and do the same thing over and over again. And sometimes recording different noises or getting different inspiration in the real world is what drives that change. That subgenre of now this is my music defined for the next group.
Well, you were saying earlier about Kruller, this idea of what happens when Author and Punisher is part of a band. And I've been like listening to this album kind of repeatedly over the last few weeks. It's kind of become apparent to me, like, if you could take Tristan Schoen doing the Author and Punisher thing, like that is his persona, let's say, and say, we're also going to put a rest of a band around you. If this is what you got, I'd be very fucking satisfied with that. And I'd be curious to put him in a room. I mean, name 5 of your favorite artists and throw him in the middle of that as artist number 6. I'd be really curious to see what he could do as a full ensemble. And I get that as a person who trusts their own creative vision more than they trust anything else. That's really hard to do and actually requires, I think, a certain amount of vulnerability as a creator. But I also think a person's vision changes over time, right? Like,
absolutely.
With my own project, the Fright Lab, when you combine short episodes and long episodes, there's like 80 some episodes. And my vision, while it hasn't really changed, it has certainly evolved or mutated or changed over the last few years. It's unavoidable. I'm sure the same is true of discography discussion, comparing I think I remember listening to the earliest episode of the show. I think it was Metallica. Compared that to
episode 1.
Yeah. Compared to other later episodes. Of course it's the same show. It's a lot of the same people with the same focus, with the same structure, but it is a very fucking different thing. And I think that's good. I think that's unavoidable. I don't want a band I don't want Skinny Puppy to sound in 2020 or whenever the last album was, like 2017. I don't want them to sound like they did in 1994, like 6 albums in. There's a certain level of growth and evaluation and change that has to occur with anything. No one wants stale bread. And I think this is a classic case where we're taking a cool idea and now we're playing with it differently. It's kind of, in a perverse way, it's almost like the remake of a movie, because you're taking this cool idea and you're doing something different with it. If not, you're just repeating the same idea and not expanding it in any meaningful way.
It's interesting because it sounds like the right answer all the time, but over time, and especially within the genre of metal, there are a lot of bands that the diehard fans get upset because it doesn't sound the same. There is an entire group of fans that only wants Metallica to release Kill 'Em All.
Right, yeah.
Forever. And music is one of the best creative mediums out there because you're using the same core idea, the same core instrument. We know what this sounds like, and you're finding ways to manipulate it, make it sound different. Then we have production changes and technology that makes it easier, but also challenges everyone to still make it sound good. There's an entire era of music in the early 2000s that is very intentionally thin. And my theory has been for a while that it was at that genesis of file sharing and low quality music and MP3s. And some of that was just intentionally middle finger to the audience. We know you're going to steal it, so we're going to make it sound like shit. But the other side of that is it's cheaper to make the music this way. It takes less effort, less time. There's less opportunities for error. So we're going to record the guitars this way now. It's always been a thing. I think we all get the most enjoyment out of the latest way to make music when we've had time to sit with it. When the artist, when the engineer, when everybody just figures out how to make it sound good, that's when you get the best results. And your earliest examples are going to be, how do I make this sound that I hear in my head? But once you get past that and you find it, you start taking it further. And you mentioned the interview talking about, I got into hiking and I heard something new. I heard something different, and I started applying that to my craft. I started thinking about, how can this make what I'm already doing better, different, and new? But he didn't think about it like that. He just heard the muse. The inspiration found him. And that's what started this whole thing. You know what I really like? This doom metal concept, but I want to actually do it. I don't want to just press the buttons in the laptop and press play. Or this was the mid-2000s, so it was probably still a tower PC or some very thick, frowned upon by certain company. Wow, I had a Dell laptop once.
Whomst amongst us.
That alone was a good starting point. And this might be my final thought on Author and Punisher. I think the earliest audio recordings of music were done the best that they could be done based on the technology that was available at the time. You fast forward a few decades, you get multi-track recording. You fast forward again, you get digital instruments. You fast forward again, you get different production methods, and the whole process of distributing music changes. You keep going. Eventually, you get to the point where now we're all threatened by predictive text engines creating versions of the music that we love. And that's not creative. And I feel very frustrated by this idea that you and I can be charged money to be spoon-fed fake music created by a computer. Fuck that. Take what the computer can do, take what the electronics can do, the synthesizers that have been around for so long, and let's take it back from the sequencer and put it in somebody's hands. Now it's like drumming. It's like playing guitar. It's like playing piano, or pick whatever you want. And let's give that to a human being. And because we can, that train is going to dirge. And I'm going to actually play this music. We're not just going to program it slow for the sake of it being dirgy. We're going to make it something that you can feel. And I think that is why Author and Punisher is so important, because I don't know anybody else that's doing what he has done. You've got other artists playing synthetic music as a band. There does exist bands that have a laptop at every station and everybody's got a keyboard and it's a synthesizer orchestra. I've seen that. But this is one person with 2 hands, 2 feet, and a voice. How brutal can he be?
For me, when I think about art of any variety, be that music, be that painting, be that stagecraft of some variety, be that acting, or just stage production, which is its own art form, I am way less concerned as to, is this original, right? Because we've been joking about it throughout the course of this show. There's always going to be a band that is bass, guitar, drum, vocals. Maybe you'll get a little lucky and there'll be a piano or something involved. But on the whole, that's going to be the majority of music as it is in the world we're in. I'm not really interested in originality. It's nice when you find it, and Author and Punisher is certainly a great example of an original sound or an original thought or an original approach. That's great. What I'm interested in is sincerity, right? Because recently, and I've played them for you, there's a band called the Nuns of the Tundra, and they're a really just ass-kickingly good rock and roll band. They've got kind of a desert rock, Mondo Generator, Queens of the Stone Age thing going on. They're a lot of fun, and they're super good, and you should go listen to them if you can. But I don't give a shit that they're a rock and roll band. I'm interested that they're sincere. They sound like they give a shit about what they're doing, and it doesn't ring hollow. What's the old saying? You know, if it's marketed right, you'll buy it. If it sounds good, you'll hear it. But if it's real, you'll feel it. And that is absolutely true. Author and Punisher might not be your cup of tea. They are, shall we say, a bit of a hard listen sometimes. They're extremely noisy. They'll kick the shit out of you. But they're real, and they're sincere, and they're chasing after their own vision. And whether you like it or not is almost irrelevant. It just so happens I kind of live for this shit. So, last thought, Author and Punisher. Sincerity is the most important yardstick of any sort of artistic endeavor. And this, ugly though it may be, is quite real. So I would recommend, if you like industrial, if you like it doomy and gloomy, if you want to kind of feel like you just got beaten up by an album, first of all, therapy is real and available. Second of all, maybe Author and Punisher is a nice accompaniment while you're driving out to your therapist's office.
And if not, find a place on the couch and pass out, because this is going to be a very, very good ride. And what is your album of the week, Lucas?
Okay, so I don't know if it's a full-length album. I have a couple things I've been kind of grooving to recently. The one that's been sticking out, I just dropped the name, The Nuns of the Tundra. It's a single more than it's an album. It's called The World's Gone Crazy and So Have I. Lead track on it is a song called Low. It kicks a bunch of ass. I cannot recommend it enough. There's another artist who I got turned on to kind of at the end of 2025. They're a Singaporean or Taiwanese, I'm drawing a blank now, electronic act called Gone Moon. And they have a song called Amnesia, and it kicks a bunch of ass, and it's beautiful, and it's sensual, and it's all over the place. But if I'm going to recommend two albums to you right now, really anything by Nuns of the Tundra or Gone Moon. What have you been listening to recently, Joe?
I am going to give a shout out once again to Lauren Kozlowski, Matt Nas over at the Roach Coach. They did an episode a while back about a band called Issues, and their 2016 album Headspace has been in constant rotation. It is one of those, yes, it's new metal, but it's not Limp Bizkit. It's very much incorporating melody and a little bit of that R&B flavor. It's very funky, and it'll make you feel good, it'll make you dance, and it'll make you headbang all at the same time.
You know, there's something to be said for that, though. Not everything needs to have hard artistic lines around it, right?
Absolutely. Well done, sir. We made it to the end.
Mm-hmm.
What a dirge it's been.
You really just like the word dirge, I think.
I really do. There's a lot of words I've been accused of liking over the years, and that happens to be one of my favorites.
You know, therapy, it is an option.
And on that note, this has been episode 286 of Discography Discussion. Thank you for listening. Subscribe to our podcast everywhere you listen to podcasts, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. Visit discussmetal.com for all things discography discussion, and please send questions and comments to questions@discussmetal.com. If you want to keep this conversation going, join us on Discord. discord.discussmetal.com.